What happens if multiple people are at fault for a wreck? So there are a lot of times when my client comes in and either there are multiple cars in a wreck, like 3-4 cars, or 2 cars, but both sides are pointing at each other. Well, once upon a time, we had what was called contributory negligence. And the way the law used to work was that if the plaintiff, if the person making the claim, is at all at fault, even 1% at fault for his own injury, then he cannot collect. It's kind of a brutal rule because there's a lot of time that maybe 1% at fault, but the other guy was sure as heck mostly at fault, and he should pay his fair share. And so the law changed about 40 years ago for what we call comparative negligence. And comparative negligence is just that. We compare everybody's portion of the negligence, and then it depends on the situation, but we apportion it based on their portion. In Nevada, we do a modified comparative. The way that we do it is that a claimant, an injured party, can collect so long as they are not more at fault for their own injury than the defendants. So, for example, let's say that a jury comes back and says that the plaintiff is 51% at fault for his own injuries. He loses. He gets 0. But if he's 50% at fault, then we look at the other parties and we then figure out what 50% of the damages are, and we portion it between them. Now, it's a little bit different if we have an innocent victim. On several liability, it means that each party is going to pay their portion of the damages. But when you have an innocent victim, you get joint and several liability. And in joint and several liability, the victim can collect 100% of their damages from any party or any combination of the parties. And so what that means is, let's say that you have an innocent victim who's 0% at fault, and you have one party that's 90% at fault and one party that's 10% at fault. But the party that is 10% at fault has huge insurance, and the party that's 90% at fault has really bad insurance or no insurance. Well, the innocent victim can collect all of it from the 10% at fault victim. We can have discussions and debates about whether that's fair or whether that's not fair, but that is the law. Innocent victims get to collect 100% of their damages from any one party or any combination of parties. They can't get more than the 100%. They can't collect 100% from him and 100% from him. That doesn't work. That wouldn't be fair. What happens then in Nevada if one of the people who are at fault are not a party to the lawsuit? And that happens actually quite a bit, and sometimes on purpose, where you have the victim who may be, say, 1% at fault, or arguably is 1% at fault, and you have the 10% at fault victim and then the 89% at fault victim, and the 89% at fault victim has no money, but the 10% victim or the 10% at fault party is, say, Walmart. The way the Nevada law works is the person who is hurt can absolutely choose to only sue Walmart. And when that happens, the question that will ultimately be in front of the jury is who's more at fault, Walmart or the victim? And then we're going to compare only the percentages of fault of the people that are actually in the courtroom. So Walmart and the victim. So the jury might decide the victim at that point is 10% at fault and Walmart is 90% at fault, in which case Walmart would have to pay for 90% of the victim's damages. And so there is a little bit of strategy that goes on when you're selecting who is at fault and who you're going to make a claim against. In that particular case, Walmart cannot point to the other guy, the guy who's not there, and say, but they're 90% at fault. They should have to pay 90% of the damages. That's called the empty chair rule. They cannot point to the empty chair. Walmart is welcome to argue that it is not at all at fault and that all the fault lies on another person. But they cannot argue that another person is partially at fault. They're not allowed to do that. Now, they are allowed to sue the other person, even in that same lawsuit. It's called a third-party complaint, and pull that person in to make sure that he pays his fair share of the damages. But then the jury is going to have that same decision. Who's more at fault, the plaintiff and the defendant, Walmart, in this scenario, and apportion damages between them. And then, once they've awarded damages against Walmart, they'll make the decision about whether Walmart can try to push those damages onto the third-party defendant, in which case the plaintiff still collects all their money from Walmart, and Walmart will then collect from the third-party defendant if they can. So there is definitely some strategy, and you want to make sure that you're with a lawyer that understands that strategy to get you the best result possible. If you have any questions about comparative negligence, just leave a comment down below and we'll try to answer them.